Well, I see that it's just about 10 o'clock now, so Karen, are you ready to begin? I'm going to introduce you first, but I want to make sure you're all set.
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Okay, well, good morning, everyone. I am Barbara Hawk, Swiftland's Continuing Education Coordinator. It is my pleasure to welcome you to this morning's webinar, Cataloging Electronic Resources Using RDA. Karen Snow is an assistant professor in the Graduate School of Library and Information Science at Dominican University in River Forest, Illinois. She received her PhD in Information Science in 2011 from the University of North Texas, where she taught cataloging courses primarily online from 2006 until 2011 for the Department of Library and Information Sciences. She previously worked as a cataloger in the Rare Book Room, University Archives, and the Technical Services Departments at the University of North Texas. She currently teaches beginning and advanced cataloging courses at Dominican University, both face-to-face and online. Have a wonderful learning opportunity ready for you this morning with Karen Snow. Please welcome Karen Snow and enjoy her webinar this morning. All set, Karen?
Yeah, ready to go. Thanks, Barb. Thank you.
Sure.
Well, good morning, everyone. Are you ready for some RDA bright and early in the morning? So it was great meeting. For those of you guys who came to the face-to-face workshop in May, it was really exciting getting to meet you guys and all the webinars thus far. You guys have been really great. So let's keep going, right? So today we're just going to focus on electronic resources. And as always, please feel free to, if you have a question, just type something in the chat. You don't need to raise your hand because I'm going to be monitoring the chat box as I usually do. And if you have a question or comment, I'd be more than happy to address that as we're going along. I like to kind of have this, be something where I'm just not talking at you the whole time, but this is going to be kind of more of a discussion. So anyway, so with that said, let's go ahead and get going. I hope that there'll be, I've tried to plan it so that there is going to be some time at the end so we can answer their questions, okay? So please feel free, if you don't want to jump in the middle, just kind of write down your questions and we can talk about it at the end, okay? So, all right, so in this session, I'm going to talk about first, what's the difference between electronic resources, how they're defined in AACR2 versus RDA, and then kind of launch into the, the nitty-gritty and really focus on the new RDA guidelines of Sorry, someone's microphone. Is that Barb or Luli? Sorry, someone's, okay, like kind of a lot of background noise with the microphone. Thank you. Publication information and physical description, and then the new mark fields, and then I'll have record examples at the end. So I'm not going to be able to cover, since this is only an hour, right, I'm not going to cover like every single field that's in each of a record of electronic resources. I'm just not going to have time to do that, but I'll try to get through as much as I can, and then you'll see the record examples, and if you have any further questions about anything that's in those records, you are welcome to email me and we can talk further, or we can talk about it further in the workshop that I'm going to have, another face-to-face workshop at the end of August. So, so there we go. That's what we're covering today. Let's go ahead and get started. Woo. Okay, so in AACR2, the definition for electronic resource is in front of you, okay? So material, data, and/or programs encoded for manipulation by a computerized device. This is from the AACR2 glossary, and it's for those of you familiar with AACR2, you know how it's divided up according to type of material, right? So it's covered, the rules associated with cataloging electronic resources are covered under Chapter 9 of AACR2. Now, if we look in RDA, it's pretty much the exact same definition, except they changed material to resource at the beginning. So a resource, data and/or programs encoded for manipulation by a computerized device. And also notice that they do not refer to these resources as electronic resources, but digital resources, okay? So, but otherwise, we're talking about the same thing, essentially. This is from the RDA Toolkit glossary, this definition. And so really the key here is that we're talking about resources that must be accessed from a computer of some sort. Either it's, be a, laptop, desktop computer, iPad, something where you can access the material. Otherwise, you can't access it. It has to be some sort of computerized device. So we are today, and there's all sorts of digital resources out there, as we all know. But today I'm going to kind of use these three examples kind of throughout my discussion. Just to kind of show you kind of how different digital resources are. I'm going to probably just interchange those electronic digital resources, kind of so used to saying electronic. How these differ then in when we're describing them under RDA. So an electronic book, a website, kind of sticking with my Twilight theme. For those of you guys who attended the workshop, I gave, like the Twilight themed record examples. Once again, not that I'm obsessed with Twilight, far be it, but it just kind of provides nice little set of examples for things. And then kind of, it's not Twilight, this Risk 2 computer game on CD-ROM for that. So, yeah, because I'm sure there must be sort of CD-ROM something for Twilight, but I just not going to go that far. I'm not too obsessed with the Twilight example to kind of go that far. So we're going to look at these examples or how they should be described under RDA. So let's just start first by looking at the bigger picture here. And at the very beginning of RDA, in Chapter 1, in Section 1, type a description, it discusses how there can be three types of description. You can have comprehensive description, so description that describes a resource as a whole, like a map, a periodical, a collection of posters, for example. Analytical description, so a description that describes part of a larger resource, and then hierarchical description that combines a comprehensive of a whole resource with analytical description. So that's the hierarchical description I'm not going to really talk about because that's not something we typically do in traditional library cataloging, but we do, for most electronic resources, we'll be using comprehensive description. We'll describe the resource as a whole, so like a website as a whole. But you can, if you want, have an analytical description. So, for example, just describe one page or one image on a website, for example. That would be an analytical description. But I'm just going to focus on the comprehensive description of our example digital resources here today. So that's covered in RDA 1.1.4. Now, there's also decisions to make on what exactly you have, the mode of issuance, so to speak. So reflecting whether or not a resource is issued in one or more parts, the way it's updated, and its intended termination. So the electronic book and the CD-ROM game, and I didn't mention this here, but it is a CD-ROM game as well, are both single units. Okay, so they are, a resource that's issued either as a single physical unit, or in the case of an intangible resource, a single logical unit. So they use the example of a PDF file mounted on the web as a single logical unit. But our website is an integrating resource, so it's like a continuing resource in its own. So a resource that's added to or changed by means of updates that do not remain discrete but are integrated into the whole. So like loose leaf manuals like AACR2, for example, and a website that's updated continuously are integrating resources. So that's why when I'm talking about like the electronic book, it seems to have a lot more in common. It will have more in common with the CD-ROM game than our website, just because the website's a little bit different in that respect, because it's added to or changed by means of updates. So you want to choose the current iteration of it when describing it, and you want to make a note identifying the current iteration consulted in making the description. And we'll talk about how we do that here today, I promise. So. Okay, so starting with the electronic book, let's look at preferred sources of information. And you'll find that if you are familiar with AACR2, much of what is said in RDA is very, very similar. So this shouldn't be completely out of the blue, some of this description. So at RDA 2222, it does say that you want to use the title page like we usually always do with books. So same thing applies to electronic books, that you want to use the title page, title sheet, or title card, or image of it as the preferred source of information. And that's really key for the electronic resources, is that, image of it, right? So, because with electronic resources, you typically don't have the physical title page in front of you. You'll have an image of it, right? So, and if it lacks a title page, you would want to use one of the following sources that contains the title in this order. So it does say, in this particular order, that you should use these if there is not a title page present. So like the cover or jacket issued with the resource, or the image of, a caption, masthead, colophon, or other source within the resource. And one thing also to keep in mind is that RDA does treat I guess things that accompany the resource as being part of the resource itself. So like, for example, the dust jacket or a container of a DVD or things like that, which traditionally AACR2 has been kind of like about, right? Like it's always better to kind of look at like, title screens or things affixed to the resource and so forth, first. And if you cannot find anything, then you use like, a container or something else outside the resource. But RDA treats all that information as essentially part of the resource itself, as long as key being that it's issued with, from the publisher and so forth. So something official in a sense. But electronic books, here we go. It's pretty much the same type of instruction that we're used to. Now the websites, you want to, and this is covered under RDA 22242, so kind of a separate rule here. You want to use the preferred source of information, so first the textual content, and then embedded metadata. So if you can't find a title on just looking at the home page, for example, of a website, you need to find embedded metadata if it is available that contains the title. So here the example is metadata embedded in an MP3 audio file. So and if none of these sources has the title, then use the preferred source of information, another source forming part of the resource itself. So is important being, preference being to the information that's formally presented with the item. So if there is like an official document that you're aware of that comes with, the website, for example, that's put out by the publisher of the website or the author of the website, then you can use that, for the source of the title, and that's fine. So those are addressed specifically in specific rules, for like an ebook and then a website, and then there's this rule for other sources. So I covered, for our electronic book, our website, and now looking at our CD-ROM game. Okay, that's not specifically covered in the rules that we just discussed. Okay, so that's covered under this other rule that's nearby. It's part of these series of instructions, RDA 224, that covers other resources. So all other resources that do not fall within RDA 2222 or 2223. So 2222 being resources consisting of more than one page, etc. So books essentially, or ebooks, and then resources consisting of moving images. So the other resources include like audio recordings, games, and so forth. So websites as well. I mean, we kind of covered this other rule for websites, but this one specifically for other things. But anyway, so you want to use the preferred source of information, this first one, textual source of the resource itself, so a slide or a label that's permanently printed on or affixed to the resource, so excluding accompanying textual material or container. So this is the preferred source of information, if possible. And then second would be like a title screen, and then next container accompanying material. So in this order. And like I said, this is largely what's said in AACR2 as well for these types of resources. But one thing that I did notice that was kind of in my mind, kind of a glaring omission was the fact that under AACR2, it says, it lists out these preferred source of information, but then said, well, then you can also just choose the one that has the most complete information and just use that first. Whereas in RDA, it doesn't say that. It just says use, in this order, these are the preferred source of information. So the label, affixing is preferred over the title screen, which is also kind of a little bit different from ACR2, which very much, as I mentioned before, prefers the item itself. So for a movie, for example, a DVD, title screens were always preferred over the container information or the disc. So but anyway, so that's kind of what I'm going to go with for like the CD-ROM, for example. So looking at the label. So here, on the left, the website, I'm using TwiFans, Twilight Fan Community, twifans.com. Here, just transcribing the 245 field, the title and subtitle, statement of responsibility, using sentence case, our traditional sentence case that we used under AACR2, which is not required under RDA, as we've discussed in previous webinars and in the workshop. RDA just says transcribe it how it appears. So I also included, as it appears on the website in the second, one that I have here, second example that you may see as well, because it's presented as all lowercase letters on the website. So that's what I have. And then I took the ingrained media, kind of the publisher, if you will, from elsewhere on that page. It's not showing up, but so yeah, I just kind of took that from the home page, and bam. And then the CD-ROM game, as it said, the preferred source is the label on the disc. So I looked at the label and RISC-2 for Encore using sentence case, but it is all in capital letters on the disc, so I have that as an option as well. So you just want to choose one or the other, and which one you choose will depend on your local policy, right? Whether or not you insist on having sentence case no matter what, or if you're fine with just kind of accepting it as it appears. So, but there we go. And then with the ebook, it just you use the title page, right? So you use the title page and you transcribe that normally. Now, for the title source, as I mentioned previously, if you do take the title proper, well, if you take the title proper, well, sorry, let me back up. So you want to make a note on the source from which the title proper is taken if it is not one of these sources. This is what it says at 2.17.2.3 in RDA. So, for example, if you have an ebook or you have an image of a title page, you do not need to make a note on the source from which the title proper is taken. You don't have to. Okay. The same goes for moving images. So if there's a title frame of a title screen of a resource consisting of moving images, then you do not need to make a note of the source from which the title proper is taken. However, for all other sources, you need to have a note in the record stating from where you took the title proper. And now that more commonly is used in the 588 field as a source of description. In the past we've used the 500 field, which is not incorrect because that's our catch-all note field, right? But now the 588 field is the standard. So in the 588, no indicators needed. You just put I took the title from the container, the title from the PDF cover page, title from the home page, whatever is appropriate for your particular item is where you note the title source. So we don't need to do that for our electronic book, like I said, because that's the exception. If it has a title page, then we don't need to do that. But for our website, we want to say title from home page, CD-ROM game, title from the disc label, and that's sufficient, just so it's clear from where you took the title, the main title proper. So okay, so hopefully everything's clear thus far. And okay, so and then you also want to include so online resources. You want to also note a date of viewing as well. For certain things, you don't need to do it for all of this, but it's just for online resources. So our CD-ROM game, we don't need to worry about that. For our ebook, we don't need to worry about. For online resources like websites, we do want to indicate when we view the source. As I mentioned kind of in one of my first slides, is that you want to, that has to do with noting like the current iteration, because it is an integrating resource. So we want to make note of when we viewed it. So we can use the 588 field again for that information, I believe. We'll check. And by the way, for those who are probably a lot more well-versed in cataloging electronic resources, please feel free to correct me if any of these things really strike you as, that doesn't seem right, because I'm sure that there's some of you guys who have much more experience doing, cataloging with these types of materials than I do. But right now I'm just kind of going through the rules and trying to, catalog based upon the rules and what I've also seen in practice. And so feel free to correct me if there's something you feel is wrong. So, but here I include the 5888 for title from the home page, and then when it was viewed, just so it's clear when I viewed it. So, and I don't need to do that for the CD-ROM game, as I mentioned earlier. So. Okay, so let's delve into these new fields, right? We've already talked about many of these new fields in previous webinars and also in the workshop. And in an advanced workshop at the end of August, I'm going to go through these in more detail. But I'm going to really focus today on the ones that really apply most to electronic resources, and some of these will apply to some electronic resources and some won't, right? So, because some electronic resources have, video characteristics, for example, and some don't. So you really want to choose the fields that are appropriate to the resource you have in hand, right? And also keep in mind, and I'll kind of reiterate this later on, is that, like 264 is required, 336 field, the content type is required, 338 carrier type is required, but really most of these other ones are not necessarily, they're not core, they're not required. So if you do have an electronic resource and you really, or a digital resource, if you will, under RDA, and you can't really figure out the digital file characteristics, for example, the 347 is important for these digital resources. If you just really can't figure anything out based upon what you have in hand, then it's not required. You don't have to do it, okay? So, and I have seen that. That's kind of actually somewhat frustrating with looking at electronic resources and like WorldCat, for example, is that, you may have an RDA record, but you may not necessarily see this 347. And, I'm a believer in having, as much information as possible, in the record, as long as you are able to, state that information truthfully and not just make something up. But anyway, but for most of these, you'll want they'll have like controlled terms provided for you at these specific RDA rules. So like 6.9, 3.2, 3.3 for the content, media, and carrier type, and so forth. That will be there. So let's first start with publication information. Remember that we use the 264 field in RDA records and not the 260. Okay, so 260 is AACR2, 264 is for RDA. So please do not use 260 in RDA records. Here is this a screenshot from the OCLC Bibliographic Formats and Standards website, which has the first indicator, which is typically blank, and then the second indicator indicating the function of the entity, whether you have a production, publication, distribution, manufacture, or copyright information. For publication information, we use RDA 2.8, and it does state specifically that you want to consider all online resources to be published, just like under AACR2. And for electronic books, the publication information is typically based upon the print version. So, bam, it's pretty easy. Integrating resources can be a little trickier, trying to figure out publication information, because that's not always obvious from the actual website. You sometimes have to do a little bit of digging. So this rule 28153, you want to change the place of publication and publisher name to reflect the current iteration of an integrating resource, our website. And then make a note on the earlier place if it's considered important. So, and you always want to try to identify a particular, a place or a publisher, and so forth, rather than putting, place of publication not identified or publisher not identified, if at all possible. If it's, possible just to at least state, United States as the place of publication, that's preferable over just putting place of publication not identified. But you do have to put something there. You can't just leave it blank. And for websites, it does say that you should include the beginning and or ending date of the publication from the first and or last iteration, or for another source. So if it's not clear from the website itself when it started, there are other ways of going about finding that information, namely the Wayback Machine. If you go to this archive.org/web, you can type in the name of the website, put in the URL, and it'll tell you when it essentially started, okay, when people began visiting the sites, and you can use that as a basis for your publication, your data publication information for a website, an integrating resource. So I typed in the twifans.com, and it did say 2009 is when it was, it started essentially, even though on the website it has, if you scroll down to the bottom of it, it has, copyright 2014. We still can include that in our record, the copyright date, because that's what's on there, even though LCPCC practice says, it's optional, including the copyright information is optional. So you may not see that very, very frequently in the records. But you want to put the 2009 in square brackets and then a hyphen there to show that's when the website began. And here I wasn't quite sure where. Oh, good. Okay, yeah. So Wayback Machine, that's a very super duper handy little website. So yeah, make sure you take down that URL if you're not aware of that. Very, very cool. And then I just placed a publication not identified just because I couldn't quite find. Obviously you can look up the name of the, the company name, the Encoding Media, but it's. Yeah, it really, I guess it depends on how much time and effort you want to put into it. But because I think they're primarily in the United States, so I could just put, United States here, Encoding Media, and so forth. So, and then, like I mentioned before, the ebook, the electronic book, is just, based upon the same information that you'd find in the printed version. So that's why I have a 588 field here, description based upon print version record. You'll find that very frequently in ebook records, right? So. And once again, the copyright information, I always like to include it in there because I'm always fond of including more information rather than less information that could be potentially helpful for your users. But like I mentioned before, because Library of Congress and the PCC, are only putting in the copyright information if that's all that's on there, then you may not always see a record that contains copyright, even if even if it's on the item itself. In terms of frequency, just kind of sticking with the website again, the integrating resource, you also want to include information on the frequency of it if it's known, okay? So that's in this MARC field 310, and it's covered under RDA 2.14. So the intervals at which the issues are parts of a serial or the updates to an integrated resource are issued. If it's known. So, and it does provide certain terms there at RDA 2.14.1.3, but if you can't find a term that's appropriate or the frequency is irregular or you just don't know when it's updated, or maybe it's just, updated on an hourly basis or whatever, make a note giving the details if you can, and then use the subfield B if you know when it was originally, started. Being updated. So here I just have 310 daily. Presumably this is updated daily. This website is primarily, sorry I forgot to mention this at the beginning, is just primarily writings like blogs and such by people who like Twilight and so forth. So presumably this is updated on a daily basis, so that I just kind of put daily 2009 and so forth. So which I'll show you in the final version of our record. So. Okay, so now physical description. Let's talk about physical description of this, which is, not as complete as if you've seen electronic resource records. It's not going to be as complete, I guess, as a print version. Like it won't have dimensions, for example, because it's electronic. Unless it's like a CD-ROM, right? That'll be the difference. But if you have like an online resource, for example, or an ebook, you wouldn't have that. But for the extent, we can describe that. That's at RDA 3.4, and it does say specifically there that you want to use a term from the list of carrier types at 3.313. So carrier types being the 338 field. Okay, so we're actually using the same terms from the carrier type in the 338 in the 300A, our physical description field. So here are just I have the little screenshot of computer carriers from 3.313, the carrier types like computer card, computer chip cartridge, and so forth that we can use. And if it does say if none of the terms apply, then you can record other, or you can use a term in common usage, like a trade name, for example. So some examples they provide are, audio slide or USB flash drive and so forth. So, it does give you options, so that it may not this may not be always consistent from record to record what term is used, but it does say that you should prefer the carrier type, if possible. So we have our short list of terms here, so I'm applying that to each of our items here. So we have 2 online resources, and I did choose to use this RDA sub rule, if you will, the 3417 for number of subunits to indicate the number of pages, images of pages, if you will, in my online resource. And then, 1 online resource for the Twilight website, and then for my RISC-2, it's 1 computer disk. So that's, from my list. So I have computer disk, and then online resources are 2 valid carrier types that we can use here. So, bam. All right. So speaking of which, let's move into our 336, 337, and 338 fields, our content, media, and carrier type, our new fields in RDA, which are used instead of the GMD, that 245H in AACR2 records. And as I've mentioned previously, the content type and carrier type are the only ones that are core. They're the only ones that are required. You do not need to add a media type, but you'll see it frequently done anyway. But content type being the content of the item, not the container, like text, still image, and perform music. Media type being broad terms describing attributes of a carrier, like audio, computer, unmediated. And then carrier type being specific terms for distinguishing manifestations of the carrier. So volume, video disc, and online resource, and so forth. So there you go. So looking at the content type and the terms that you use for the content type are at RDA 6.9. We use this 336 field. We don't need any indicators. And we, in the subfield A, we put if the work is primarily text, then you use text, all in lowercase letters. And then we want to add a subfield 2 to show from where we took that term. And in this case, RDA, the content rules. So RDA content, all smushed together, lowercase letters, and no period at the end. But this is repeatable. So if a website, for example, has text, images, moving images, and video, and so forth, if there's a bunch of different things, then you can add that. You can just add multiple 336 fields. You don't want to put it all into one 336 field, but you have separate 336 fields for each of the predominant content types on for the item. Okay, and that's fine. That's fine. But I always try to use think of it in terms of, okay, what's a prominent type here. So if it's something like a website that just kind of has a few images on it, like just on the home page, for example, that may be misleading if you were to say this has a bunch of still images when it's primarily text. So think of that also in terms of regular books as well, or anything else. You want to really focus on what the prominent content is, and then go from there. Now our CD-ROM game, I put 2-dimensional moving image, and I'll show you the next slide to kind of explain that further. So common content types for electronic resources, you'll see here, I have the definition from RDA on 2-dimensional moving images. So content expressed through images intended to be perceived as moving in 2 dimensions. And it does here, I kind of made the bigger font and underlined video games as being one of the examples of a 2-dimensional moving image content type. So just so you know, even though we've probably had discussions, you amongst your colleagues, and I agree that some of these terms are not exactly super user friendly. Let's put it that way. But I think that there's going to be many libraries that kind of decide to kind of keep these behind the scenes to help with searching, faceted browsing and so on and so forth. They obviously, they're not meant for the user to actually search like, oh, I'm looking for two-dimensional moving images, knowing exactly what to say to search that way. But so we're still kind of in that transition stage, trying to figure out how exactly we're going to use these to the fullest extent. But yeah, but a lot of the electronic resources items will be, computer program. Here the content expressed through digitally encoded instructions intended to be processed and performed by a computer. So, yeah, that's what, well, computer program for, sorry, computer program for some, but then, sorry, I was thinking something else. So like operating systems and application software and so on and so forth. So, but things like PDFs, electronic books and websites that are primarily text-based, and you say like they're text. That's their primary content. Okay, and then media type, like I said, which is not core. You don't have to do this. It is the categorization reflecting the general type of intermediation device required to view, play, run, etc. the content of the resource. So many could argue that this is not even all that super helpful, since it is so general, and we can usually tell that it's a electronic resources from other areas of the record. But here we use the term computer for electronic resources, so media used to store electronic files designed for use with a computer. Okay, so that includes media that are accessed remotely through file servers, as well as direct access, computer tapes, disks, and so forth. So for all of our digital resources that we're looking at today, computer is our media type at minimum. Okay, you can add further media types if you want, if there's other prominent media featured, but that's going to be pretty much standard for most, right? And we add the subfield 2. Don't forget to add that subfield 2 RDA media. To show that this is an RDA media type term. So the terms, once again, are at RDA 3.2 for the media type. So, and then finally, the carrier type. That's also terms that are more specific. Okay, so computer carriers, we have these options here, and I included, this is from the Library of Congress MARC website that includes not only the terms you can use, but also codes if you want to use those in addition to or instead of the terms. The codes are not in RDA, so don't look for them, but they are on this website, which you can use and in that subfield B if you want. But I'm just kind of using the subfield A, the terms, in my examples. So here, we've already kind of done the legwork on this, right? Because we already have looked at this for our physical description, our extent, right? We have that in our 300A, so we can just take what we chose in our 300A and put it into 338, right? So we want to use it RDA 3.3. We use online resource for both our ebook and our website, but we use computer disk for our CD-ROM, right? So we just use those same terms, but add subfield 2 RDA carrier for that. So there we go. Now, finally, I'm going to look at this one field that I haven't really talked about before, the digital file characteristics, a new field, MARC field 347. It is not core and therefore not required, but helpful, if you do know the information needed for this particular field. It's covered in RDA 3.19. It's a technical specification relating to the digital encoding of text, image, audio, video, and other types of data in a resource. So this includes, file type, encoding format, file size, resolution, regional encoding. This is why this is important for video recordings, for recording the regional encoding, encoded bit rate, and so forth. I mean, you're not going to necessarily know all this information for every single digital resource you come across, nor will it apply. All of these apply to every single resource. So it just really depends on what you have. So you kind of want to take it that way. So here's the actual rule, just a screenshot of the rule, just so you can see that if you want to give further instructions on like color characteristics, for example, it says, go to 7.17, sound characteristics, video characteristics, and so forth. So, so the basic instructions for recording digital file characteristics. And this is just the screenshot from, once again, from OCLC bib formats and standards. The 347, we don't need any indicators for this, and then it specifies, the marked subfields needed for here, because as you know, RDA is encoding format neutral, so it doesn't actually say in RDA, okay, put file type in subfield A and put encoding format in subfield B and so forth. So it will say, look, here are the rules. So here's the rule associated with file type and then encoding format, and then you can use this website to make sure you have it all matched up to the correct subfield code. So file type here is in 347A. And you can see here some examples. If you scroll down the page, this is from the same page I had from the last slide, the 347 page, how this is structured, this field is structured. So OCLC just assumes subfield A, unless it's different. But here you can see it's just a string of information. So subfield A, so we have, data file, subfield B, XML, subfield C, 182 kilobytes, and so on and so forth. So you just want to kind of put that all in a string using the controlled terms that are specified, if they are specified in RDA. And then if you do use the terms that are used in RDA, then you put that subfield 2 RDA at the end. So let's start from the top. So 347A, the file type at 319.2. This is the general type of data content encoded in a computer file. Very basic. Like audio file, data file, image file, program file, text file, and video file are your only options listed here. So very, very general. And for some things, it's pretty straightforward, like our electronic book. Okay, yeah, text file. Our website, if it's primarily textual, bam, use text file. I was a little more uncertain with the RISC one, because it's a video game, right? So it has a bunch of different things. So I, based upon this, program file seemed to fit best. But I have actually, when I've looked at other examples in WorldCat, I've seen people use like data file, which it doesn't really seem right to me, because that seems just, I don't know, a program file seems to include multiple different file formats and so forth to execute a program, right? This is essentially, it's a program. So this seemed to fit best. However, I'm more than willing to hear other people's take on this. If you find something different that you feel like maybe fit best, then let me know. But also keep in mind that you can include multiple if that would fit best, because this is repeatable. 347 is repeatable. So if you have a resource that includes multiple file types, then you can do that. Put the 347 for text file, 347 for image file, and so forth. So. And that's perfectly acceptable. So, encoding format is the next stop on our 347 train. The schema, standard, etc., used to encode the digital content of a resource. And it does give many examples for this. Like here, I didn't include all of them because I couldn't fit them all in my slides, but here's some common ones that you would find for electronic resources. So in text encoding formats, audio, data, image, and so forth. So you would put that in subfield B. So if you have an audio file that's an MP3 specifically, then you use how it says MP3 under audio encoding formats in subfield B. If it's an image, use GIF or JPEG or whatever you have, a text file that's XML, and so forth. And if none of the terms in the list is appropriate or sufficiently specific, then you can use another term, and that's fine. I mean, really the key in my mind is just, being consistent, right? So if you don't want to use one of these terms that's in the list there at 319.3, then you want to be consistent in your usage. So in whatever term you use, because that will help things collocate together properly when if these are searchable in your catalog. So, with that in mind, I decided, since it's not clear with the RISC disk, that what that is, the encoding format, I just left it blank, because these are all optional. Remember, you don't have to have it. And in a sense, if you don't know, or if there's just too many to deal with, it's best just to leave it off. Okay, so that's fine. For our text file, I know that both of my electronic book and my websites are both text files, and my website's obviously HTML primarily, and my book it is, I didn't tell you previously, but it is PDF, so I have that in subfield B for each of these. And then as we continue on through these, I'm just going to kind of show you these just so you're aware, but I'm not going to necessarily use every single one of these with each of my items because they don't always apply. For this one, if you do know the file size, then record it. If you don't. So yeah, for the file size if it can be readily ascertained by and is considered important for identification or selection. So you want to record it in file size in bytes, kilobytes, megabytes, or gigabytes is appropriate, right? So if I know, for example, that my Twilight ebook is 760 kilobytes, then I can record that in subfield C. But you don't have to if you don't know that information. So so bam, there you go. I record 760 kilobytes. Bam. Okay. And resolution, this is primarily for digital images. I kind of can't see it very well, but here, digital image kind of underlined here under the scope. So if your item does contain digital images and you know the resolution, then bam, there you go. So here I have an example, the 347. It's an image file, a JPEG specifically, that I know is 3.1 megapixels. Yeah. And subfield D. Same thing with regional encoding. This is primarily for video recordings. So for video files, you know, if it's a DVD video and you know that it's what region it is, then you need to include that. That, in my mind, is pretty important, you know, for DVDs to know what region, because it's, you know, obviously if you have a DVD player that's region 1 and you have a disc that's region 4, you can't play it, Rumors will not play it. So that's important information to include. That's, once again, just for video files. But for what we have, it's not needed. Encoded bit rate, same deal. If you know the speed at which the streaming audio and video and so forth is designed to play, feel free to include that as well. Here, I just have an example here. If you know that information, you put that in subfield F. And then finally, here are my examples here, and I have. This is a little bit different. This is an ebook that actually I included in that packet I gave you guys at the workshop of the different Twilight items, and I think I adjusted it a little bit here. In fact, I don't even remember if I put the 347 in. I may have, but it's not exactly this. But here's just all the information we've already talked about today, as well as the various other information that you can include in the ebook record. Yeah. Which, I mean, like I said, I didn't have the time today to go through every single one, but feel free to email me if you have any questions. Here's just the brief record for the TwiFans website. And yeah, Deborah, yes, you will get a copy. I sent them the PDF as well as a PDF of these slides. So yes, you will have a copy of all of these slides today. So here, yeah. So anyway, here's my my website, you know, and there's going to be some variations here, obviously, depending on what you're doing. But and here's my RISC-2, and yeah, my RISC-2 record here for you guys to look at your leisure. So, okay, oh yeah, okay, and then here's just stay tuned. You know, as Barb said at the very beginning, we'll have another webinar on RDA authority records if you're interested on July 18th, and the next face-to-face workshop in Fort Myers will be advanced RDA, where I'm going to primarily focus probably on like video recordings, sound recordings, and other, as Darme called, icky stuff last time. So, and then whatever I'm not able to cover in that workshop, I'm going to try to have like either another workshop or webinars covering other stuff. So. But yeah, that's what I have. Yeah, I'll be back. I'll be back. And any questions about what I've presented here today? I'd be more than happy to. Yeah, I was just talking with someone at Plan, the other network, who has to catalog rocks, and I'm like, I don't know if I can do a webinar on rocks. I don't know, maybe I could. I could do rocks, I guess, but or just, you know, realia and artifacts and so forth. And but feel free to send me, Dharme, some like examples of stuff that you have to catalog, and maybe I can kind of use those as an examples, kind of research that and use those as examples. That would be helpful in my mind, because I want these to be helpful to you guys. I want it to apply to what you're doing and not just come up with random stuff that you're never going to see. But anyway, any questions? So I'm more than happy to go back to any slide that you would like me to go back and explain further. Okay, all the three. Okay. Well, okay, Dharme, which one, like that had all the definitions, or hold on, I'm seeing the first one. Okay, is that one? Okay. Okay. I know which one you're talking about. Okay, hold on. That one? Right. Okay. So yeah, and here are just some other. I obviously wasn't able to cover all of the three, like 44 and 347. But obviously, if you have a resource where that's important to include sound characteristics and video characteristics and so forth, do that. I didn't talk about. I have the form of work in the video game, the Risk 2. I put, what did I put? Like computer game there, and that's is required if it's needed to distinguish one work from another. So for example, with Risk 2. Risk 2 is a board game, and here I have a video game. So in order to make it clear that I'm not talking about the board game, I included a form of work to make that clear. This is the video game rather than the board game. So it's only in those types of cases. Mm-hmm. Any other questions about the new fields or anything else? Or okay, well, okay. If anyone doesn't have, if there's no other questions, then yeah.